Our second session of the morning that is supposed to take us to another break. So you already have got your break, so we will decide whether you need that second break. We've got 4 speakers in this session, and the previous session dealt with programs at a national level. This session will particularly focus on university programs. We have Professor Sarah Howie. I just want to check whether Sarah is here. Yeah, Sarah. Then we have Gaelle Ramon. I know that she's here. Stephanie's here. I've seen Stephanie. And Angina Parekh, which I've just met earlier. So they're all here. And I'm going to invite Sarah to the podium. Once again, we're going to give you 10 minutes. And after you've done, you can probably just take a seat after you've done your presentation. And then we'll take the questions at the end. Okay, well, good.
Thank you very much indeed, and good morning, colleagues. Very happy to be here, and thank you very much for the privilege of sharing with you some of the experiences and activities we've been doing at Stellenbosch University. I've been there now a little over a year, and it's been a real privilege to establish the Africa Center for Scholarship, within which the program called the African Doctoral Academy is now situated. So these were the things that I will try to cover during the 10 minutes that I've now been allocated. I planned for 15, so I'll gallop a little bit at parts, but starting to contextualize a little bit in terms of where the program is situated, and then talking about the trends we've observed 10 years later, what we have experienced. So in particular, one of the background to the establishment of the African Center for Scholarship lies in some of the sobering, we can say sobering statistics that we see internationally and continentally, as well as for South Africa. One of the most sobering that I've seen recently is the Global Competitiveness Index, where we've dropped 5 places in the latest report. And I think that's one of the ones that situates what we are all busy with, the big picture that we're busy with in terms of scholarship development. You will also notice that I'm talking, rather than the emerging researcher language, I'm talking about scholars. And that is partly addressing the discussion we had yesterday around whether we call them academics, whether we call them emerging researchers. And I understand that the basis for this symposium was in terms of the research particularly. The African Center for Scholarship more broadly addresses that issue, the intersections of research, teaching and learning, and community engagement as well. So behind that lies the challenge, what are both challenges, but can also be seen as opportunities. So the issues around publications and patents and our contribution nationally and internationally is very relevant here. The Africa Center for Scholarship was established in 2017 in November, just shortly after I joined, and essentially it's established to develop and empower new and emerging scholars in Africa. One of the key objectives for the Africa Center for Scholarship is that we are striving to provide affordable and quality competency-based learning. And that is following now the international trends in terms of how do we enable and enhance scholarship development and career training. You will see that the African Doctoral Academy is one of a number of programs. I'm going to focus my 10 minutes on the African Doctoral Academy, which was primarily designed to deal with the phase before a PhD as well as the doctoral training itself. However, we also have programs like the Joint Schools in Africa, which we piloted last year, where we went into 3 different African countries and worked collaboratively with other scholars in those countries around scholarship training, running workshops together, co-teaching in terms of how do we enable scholarship on the continent. The other one, the Emerging Scholars Program, is intended to address the post-PhD phase. So this is, I'm just pointing it out because there's an interesting difference in the way we are applying the notion of emerging scholar. And in our program, we talk about post-PhD phase, whereas the general discussion here so far has included the PhD phase. So let's get to the African Doctoral Academy. It's celebrating 10 years of its establishment this year. It was established back in 2009 in the Faculty of the Social Sciences. You will recognize the name of Professor Johannesburg, who was instrumental in setting this up and has worked closely with the Carnegie Foundation in terms of its establishment. That Carnegie Fund has now finished, so we are in a different phase of development. For the last 5 years, it's been situated very much in our international division, which is also under the auspices of our internationalization and strategic development arm of the university. We work in all disciplines. We have annual summer and winter programs based at Stellenbosch, and we to date have actually presented 210 workshops to over 4,500 participants and to people from 53 different countries. So 2019 represents a new phase in terms of starting to introduce spring schools, and this is basically in response to the tremendous need that has been evaluated, I would say, over the last 10 years, and in terms of additional activities that needed to be fitted in. So the original vision of the ADA was to strategically support, strengthen, and advance doctoral training. So the emphasis was on doctoral training and scholarship on the continent. But as you will see from some of the numbers that I give you, you will see that the need has far stretched and expanded beyond simply doctoral training itself. So the conceptualization of the African Doctoral Academy, in fact, had a very holistic, systemic, and integrated basis to it. I don't have time to go into the intricacies of the model behind the ADA, but in fact it speaks to every aspect that I've been hearing over the last day and a half, which is very interesting. So it did take into account issues around leaky pipelines, for instance, starting with the younger scholars moving through to the mature phase and the supervision needs. The original objectives, as you will see, were firstly to expand and diversify PhD capacity development. It was to capacitate supervisors on the African continent across disciplines, not only within disciplines, to address strategic elements of that leaky pipeline that gets mentioned frequently, to look at establishing sustained collaboration and networks and partnerships, to produce high-quality researchers on PhD education in Africa, which is another element I've been hearing the last day and a half, and then to also firmly establish governance and management structures, which it then did. How do we do this? Well, I've clustered these in terms of the generic and specialist skills training that has been offered over the last 10 years, but also in terms of providing us with a model to move forward as we are undergoing a curriculum revision. But if you cluster them, they cluster into research designs and methods, ranging from beginner through to quite advanced. Originally, they would have been intended for advanced. But in terms of the caliber and level of young scholars coming in, we're finding that increasingly we're having to go back to more basic training to ensure that the foundations for their research training are solid, I would say, in terms of that foundation. So hence the beginner through to advanced. We have teaching and learning in higher education, addressing obviously the teaching and learning element of scholarship. Postgraduate supervision has been in very high demand in terms of training, not only for the doctoral supervision, but also in terms of the earlier degrees at master's, not yet honors, but we are certainly master's supervision training. And then we have generic skills like proposal writing, grant writing, project management, academic writing for thesis and also for publications. These vary at different levels. Increasingly, we're being asked to, how do we actually prepare those that have just finished their masters or about to finish their masters? How do we prepare them in terms of writing for publication? That is becoming increasingly a need across all disciplines for their publication. So we are branching out and expanding as the need continues. Also recently, we've introduced research ethics, not only focusing sometimes on discipline-specific areas like health sciences, but also more broadly in terms of what do they need to be able to do to survive not only the thesis stage, but also young researchers coming in who haven't had maybe a solid foundation in the research ethics. And a new strand, I would say, in the last year has been also on digital technology. How do we integrate that also in terms of blended learning, but also in terms of utilization, analyses, research, so there are many applications. So a typical school at the ADA would be as follows. We start with a preparatory course for those that have maybe not yet started their PhDs. There's a great need for that. That's always oversubscribed. It's a 3-day course. We go into week 1 where we have a 5-day course. We've recently introduced the introductory level introduction to research designs like quantitative research, for instance. Then in between, we have 2 days, but we use one of those days to teach skills-based training that can be incorporated in 1 day. And then week 2, we then have another 5-day course. So typically we try and mix and match so that it's possible for people to do multiple courses that fits into a nice curriculum for each and every discipline. So our 10th celebration, our annual summer school group. And then just looking in terms of funding for attendance is definitely increasingly becoming an issue. Whilst we may have at any given time about 1/3 of our delegates coming from outside South Africa, we, for instance, had a new round of scholarships that were put out. We have 25 scholarships to give away with different kinds of funding. We had 329 applications for those 25. It's incredible to see the demand, and people are battling with that. So trends for the schools over the past 10 years, just quickly to highlight. Back in 2014, we had 11 workshops, but due to the needs analysis and changes that we are making currently to the structure of the program, we're now up to 19 workshops that are held within that 2-week period. So we have a number of existing new courses that we're bringing in, for instance, since the inception of the ACS. In terms of who's coming, well, you can see the number of participants. Last year we had 776 coming through the 2 schools alone. And about 50% of those, we would say, are either preparing for, have actually registered, or are in maybe a 2nd, 3rd year of their PhD currently. So 50% are somewhere on their journey regarding the PhD specifically, which then means that 50% are not. And there are many of them are actually academics who are already got their PhD, who are coming back for additional training. And why? Sometimes it's a new area, sometimes they feel the need for more skills-based training. In terms of the subsidized delegate, you can see increasingly there is a need to find a way to subsidize delegates coming to the training. We're now up to nearly 1/4 of delegates requiring. If they didn't have that, they wouldn't be there, unfortunately, with the training. Just in terms of the age, just to give you an idea of the last 3 years, 80% are mature. They're beyond the age of 30. We even get those in their 60s and 70s coming for additional training, which was a surprise to me, I have to say. Gender, we're at 61% female at this stage, and that we've managed to achieve by actually subsidizing, so increasing the subsidies specifically to female candidates in particular. So we've concentrated on that. Nationality of the delegates, at this stage over the last 3 years, we can see that 55% are from South Africa, but 45% are coming from other countries, mainly Africa. There's been increasingly numbers from Africa coming in, but also from other countries like North America, Europe, even the East, the Caribbean. So we've had interesting people coming to the ADA schools over the past 3 years. The disciplines, I just wanted to point this out because whilst the original academy started in the arts and social sciences, it has actually expanded to the point where 44% of our participants over the last 3 years are actually coming from STEM disciplines, which one would not have anticipated. So the change in terms of where they're coming from is also signaling some kind of need as well. In terms of the presenters, who are the presenters that we've got quite a wide variety, mostly South African, several Stellenbosch presenters. We try to get our top-notch presenters to come in to work with us, but we rely mainly on our partner institutions. Leuven, for instance, is a very strong partner for us. We have Trinity College now on board as well. So we have partners coming from all over the globe, actually. What we would like to see is more partners coming from on the continent, and that's something we're working through quite actively with our joint schools now to identify more presenters from our continent. 10 years later, where are we? Well, when we start with the first objective, which was to expand and diversify, we've had the 4,000 participants exposed to training, 210 workshops. So I think we are on the road for that. In terms of capacitating supervisors, well, this is a little bit more complex because we have very close partnerships within the ADA, within Stellenbosch, I would say, so that, for instance, we have an online doctoral course that's now being offered by Crest, who works, but they work on our doctoral supervision schools as well. So we have this where we see that we have multiple elements. So we've got the supervision that is a certified course. We've got the online course, which is also going for certification, and we have the joint schools where we also focus on doctoral training too. Then if we look at the leaky pipeline, we have a partnership where our research division is very active, our postgraduate office is active, and we are active. So we've got multiple elements working together to actually address the leaky pipeline. We have a strong ADA alumni network comprising now of the participants in previous schools, so over 4,000. Producing high-quality researchers on PhDs, that currently is being done outside the ADA, but it's still in-house within Stellenbosch. So we have Crest, who are producing a lot of research that is being used widely in terms of scholarship development and postgraduate training and the latest generation of scientists, for instance, but also our Center for Higher and Adult Education at Stellenbosch. And finally, the ACS was established in 2017. So to more or less some degree, those objectives have been reached. So in terms of our way forward, well, it's a challenging context for scholarship at the moment in terms of funding and development. I'm very heartened by what I've heard today in terms of all the plans and developments. I'm very interested in how these are going to connect, how they're going to work together, what role that perhaps we can also play nationally, continentally with the developments that are underway. We're actively pursuing funding now for the program. We need strong partnerships. We have many partnerships, but we are now strengthening and prioritizing certain partnerships to lever, let's say, optimal capacity. And then what we see at the moment in terms of our strong support infrastructure at our university, I've been very impressed. I've been there for just over a year, as I mentioned. But in terms of what we have in terms of our professionalism, dedication, in terms of our research division, our postgraduate students, I can say it certainly bears well for the rest of the university in terms of what we're doing. It makes a difference for that conducive environment for scholarship to flourish. So just to show you, if this lady is helping me at the back, just to give you an idea of where we are in terms of the next winter school. These are kind of give you an idea of what kind of courses are being offered in terms of the detail, and if there's any further interest, we will be circulating this more widely. And I'd just like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to call on then Gaelle Ramon, Dr. Gaelle Ramon. She's the Manager for Research Development at UCT. And she's going to talk about the Research and Development Academy.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much to the ACU as well as USAF for inviting UCT to present today. I'm here on behalf of our VC, Professor Parekh, as well as interim DVC Research, Professor Kevin Naidu, who were unfortunately able to attend today. So I'm here in my quality of Head of Researcher Development at the University of Cape Town. And yes, I'm guilty of representing researcher development specifically. But the fact is we are working hand in hand with the CHED faculty, which is offering teaching support and developing program for that aspect. So hopefully UCT is also participating in that holistic development of our academics. The Emerging Researcher Program I'm heading particularly actually belongs to a continuum. So as much as I'm talking about researchers and a lot of staff members in today's presentation, we do think about developing researchers as a continuum. So we are looking at developing researcher from the undergraduate experience, postgraduate experience, and the life when you become a postdoc as well as a staff member. So yesterday we talked about a lot about developing our emerging researcher and having them become research leaders. And this is how basically the Research Development Academy was conceptualized. That was with that in mind that we developed this initiative. This initiative is actually very new. We've only started our activities last year, so I don't have the benefit of 10 years of experience of our academy. That said, we do have 15 years of experience internally at the University of Cape Town, and I will reflect on that. So our vision is really that we are going to be able to participate in developing researchers in South Africa as well as on the continent so that they can achieve international recognition. And our origins are very much, as I said, as a result of the Emerging Researcher Program that was developed 15 years ago under the headship of DVC Professor Cheryl Delaray and the directorship of Dr. Marilyn Sinart at the research office where we are based. And the idea was that we wanted to develop a critical mass of academics as well as develop their expertise, and so that we can have a sustainable next generation of academics. So our achievements to date, looking 15 years back, is that we have contributed quite a lot into the development of our own researchers. Now, of course, it's always difficult for us to necessarily pinpoint exactly where our development efforts have led to success, because we are one drop in the ocean, and we are very much aware that although we are located centrally and we are able to reach people across faculties and at different levels, there are other initiatives within the faculties that are assisting our researchers. The emerging researcher, as you can see, has actually to date recruited up to 900 academics. Now, this may look like a small number, but what happens is that we only recruit permanent staff members. Our contract staff members are welcome to some of our initiatives, but are not able to reach the full-fledged program that we are offering simply because of limited budget or capacity within the program. So as you can see, the Emerging Researcher Program has been a tremendous tool for transformation. Now, the numbers that you see in blue are the numbers that represent emerging researcher members. When you compare them to those in gray, which are the numbers for UCT representation. So you can see that over 58% of our members are actually Black South African researchers, and that's almost 58% of our membership is actually for women. What is also interesting to know is that we are mostly working with lecturers and senior lecturers because we have defined those as being the level at which progress and support is much needed. So further to that, over the course of the life of the Emerging Researcher Program, we have contributed to increasing the number of PhD within UCT, increasing from 40% initially in 2003 to 68% in 2017. Furthermore, 2/3 of all promotions that happen at UCT actually are allocated to past ERP alumni. So we believe that our reach has been significant and meaningful for our members. Sorry. So our principle, the idea behind the Researcher Development Academy, is really to assist in developing academics to their full research potential. So what we believe the strength of our academy is that building on the capacity that we have built over the 15 years of the ERP, we are now able to use principles that are actually universal enough so that they are applicable globally to the higher education environment. And we are able to offer training both in South Africa as well as on the continent. Now, what is really important for us to know is that, yes, we have been successful with our own people, and we are really passionate about what we are doing, but we're very much aware that we don't know everything. So our working philosophy is really for us to be coming and making partnership alliances with institutions that would like for us to come on board and assist them with providing programs to their academics. So it's really building on this partnership that we believe is going to be the success of the academy and ultimately the success for the researchers. We want really to build on our colleagues' strengths and learn from them as well as they will learn from us. These are a few samples of our programs. We have at times focused on specific skills such as how to develop grant proposal writing for publication, but at other times we offer 4 days workshops, such as the program for emerging research in South Africa, and those 4 days encompasses a number of topics that we discuss with the institution who request the training, and we include anything from ethics to doing a PhD or supervising PhDs as well as masters. We really are not wanting to come and say, this is what we have, this is what we get, but instead enter into a conversation with our colleagues so that we say, this is the material we have, and we are wanting to adapt it to your needs so that when we come and talk to our audiences, they are actually able to relate. So the material is not UCT specific. We really believe that it's nice and flexible. Just last week, actually, we had an interesting workshop that was prepared for the Carnegie Deal cohort. That one was specifically designed to assist very promising, bright, young, mostly postdoc as well as young staff to become PI as well as team leaders. So it was a really thought-provoking workshop which we just had last week. Now, our facilitation style is kind of a blended approach. What we tend to have is we work with quite small groups. We tend to have about between 25 and 30 participants. But to address those participants, we tend to bring between 2, 3, 4 presenters, depending on the topics. And what is important is that everything happens face to face. It's very interactive, so it's not just one person coming in and delivering a speech. It's very interactive. The audience is also welcome and triggered to share their own experience, which actually makes the conversation much richer. So this participatory and interactive model has been very successful, and all the feedback we receive from our alumni in the sense of how it's assisted them in progressing towards a higher level is very heartwarming for us. So these are our current partners. As I mentioned earlier on, we've only been alive for about a year. We were very fortunate in being able to offer quite a variety of workshops whereby either we came to a specific institution and then addressed an audience from that specific institution, or at times we've had multiple institution workshop, which were also very interesting because the richness of the experience that was shared and getting to learn about each other's practices and environment and landscape, and as well collaboration that can sprung while we're having those conversations are very valuable because people go back and they feel that they belong to a bigger community. So we are very thankful that those partners have given us the chance to work with them, and we are looking forward to continuing working with them. Because we are very new, I cannot tell you success stories so much, but for example, with our colleagues from CPUT, we started that long-term partnership work, which we hope is going to become the norm. They are using their UCDG grants to fund the workshops. So thank you to the DHET. And so we've started a partnership with them. Last year we offered a 4-day workshop on general basic skills and knowledge for researchers. And this year we are working together to develop for them a supervision workshop on how to develop their own supervisors. So that's a work that is a long-term work because we have to get to know their environments, to get to know their assumptions and maybe where the gaps are. And through those discussions that we're having at different levels with different people, we are really working towards developing something that is going to be really specific for them. So in the end, I really hope that I've conveyed that this initiative is here really to have institutions work with us on developing more programs to develop researchers. Obviously, it's to assist us in making our country as well as our continent more visible. You certainly all are very accustomed to that map of research outputs coming from the different countries and how Africa is so nice and slim. Well, in that case, being slim is actually not something that is desirable. We want it to become big and fat. So let's assist our country and our continent to produce healthy research outputs, and that goes through developing our next generation of researchers. So if you would like to hear about what we've done at UCT and how we could potentially assist you in developing your own program, please contact us. We really don't see what we've done internally and what we are now trying to do outside as two separate entities. We really see those entities feeding on each other, because when we go and work with institutions, we're learning so much that it's actually feeding back into our own training at UCT for our own researchers, so that they have a much broader vision of research generally. Thank you.
Thank you for reminding us that slim can be a bad thing. Stephanie, are you going to be up next, and you're going to talk about the African Science Leadership Program?
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Can you hear? It doesn't sound as if it's working. Okay. Good. Right. This is an interesting experience. I'm going to speak on a rather different level from my co-speakers today. I will say one or two things right at the end of this about the internal programs that we have, which we have actually had going for a while. But I want to speak a little bit more about some of the broader Pan-African programs that we are running, and in particular, what I want to do is to speak a bit about the leadership programs. But first, let me just remind you of what it is we're expecting of these so-called early career academics. When we put them out there and we say that they are now going to become academics, we expect an awful lot from them. We, of course, expect them to be research active, and we give them a lot, well, you've heard already, a lot of information and training about that. We expect them to start funding their own research, have a career plan, what they want to achieve. We want them to also develop international research standing. And I know from my experience with a lot of these early career researchers, just that is fairly intimidating. But we also ask them to make a contribution to what they're doing in terms of the university in collaborations, professional activities. And then we start to say, yes, but you must also travel, you must attend conferences, you must develop an understanding of international standards, you must go for more competitive funding, and you must become more active. Well, that's all about competition as much as it is about participation. And then the other thing that one must remember is that there are external expectations in terms of the stakeholders who are around any early career researcher. So not only sponsors, but the public, of course, the alumni, the National Research Administration agencies, the funders, and the public. And I'm sure you'll agree, many young researchers are intensely aware of public awareness and the need to communicate what they are doing on a public platform. But we don't train them awfully well for that. And then the other part of it, which we tend not to think about, is the importance of their understanding research integrity, transparency, ethics, openness to scrutiny, and making sure that they understand where they may or may not be vulnerable and where they need to understand how to protect themselves. And that, again, we probably don't spend enough time on. So we have been running the Africa Science Leadership Program at the University of Pretoria for a little while. And let me just say that actually the person who is behind all of this is not me, I oversee it, but my colleague, Professor Bernard Slippers, who is the director of our new Future Africa initiative and also the director of our leading institute. And I will say a little bit more about Future Africa in a moment, but I would just like to acknowledge that Bernard actually gave me a lot of this, and we work very closely together on all of this. He also doesn't work alone. There are a number of people who work with him. And I'm sorry, those are not particularly high-resolution photographs. But let me just say that the ASLP is run on the basis of a group of individuals who are facilitators. We have a facilitation company who assist us. There are a group of advisors, international advisors, who come from many different countries, Australia, Canada, Thailand, the US, Uganda, Ethiopia, and so on. And then through each of the programs, there are leading speakers who participate with this group. The whole idea is that this is about empowering research leaders. So it's not simply about empowering researchers, but for them to become leaders, and that to take a view of the global knowledge economy, a sustainable future, and focusing on Africa broadly. So there's the vision statement. The ASLP will create a community of engaged scientific academic leaders. And the leadership aspect of it is really the key to how the program works. It has a number of objectives. I realize you can read it. I'm not going to read them all out to you. But the thing I'd like to point out is that the whole idea of the program is to create a mechanism whereby networks can form. And the participants, who are the people we see as future leaders in science, have an opportunity to work together, to discuss amongst themselves how they might collaborate, and to develop projects which will allow them to develop the capacity that they need. I can say a little bit more about how that works in a while, but it's really done on the basis that people come to the programs, they come for different periods of time, they go back and they come back again. The whole idea then is to shift the way academics think, or leaders think, and to allow them to be working together in terms of being scientists, in terms of being decision makers, and also in terms of informing policy. So it will create across the continent a curriculum for academic leadership. And it's a program which can be utilized in other countries. We don't own the whole thing. But it will allow us then to connect with other science leadership programs in other parts of the world as well as in Africa. So those objectives are all on the website. There is a very nice website. You can find it by Googling ASLP. The program is an initiative of the University of Pretoria, a group of young academics led by Bernard Slippers. It's also done in association with the Global Young Academy. I'll say a short bit about that in a moment. And we have the support of the Bosch Foundation for it. It's offered to mid-career African academics. Well, there's definitions around that. But in general, most of us in this room would consider those people to be young. It facilitates a very carefully planned program, only 20 to 22 fellows each year. We facilitate a 5-day workshop initially, and people come to the university to do that, and during that time they learn a certain number of skills through workshops, some quite provocative workshops, and it's all focused on good leadership. By the end of the week, they've had a chance to interact. They've created, from what they've identified as challenges, they create projects which they will then address as teams and through collaboration with each other. And those teams and networks then remain in contact when they go back home. There we go. And just to show you the demand for all of that, we started this program in 2013 when we had about 100 applicants. We chose about 20. This year, we had 630 applicants. We haven't expanded it much. We have a slightly bigger group coming next week to start for the 2019 program. But it's been immensely popular, and I think people have found it very valuable. There is on the website an interactive map which you can find when you have the time, which shows you where the people are who are involved. And of course, it's not only this year's cohort, but all the other cohorts from previously as well, and you can find out who they are. It's a very interactive website if you're interested to find out all about it. So what does it do? We focus on collective leadership skills, on the understanding, the global understanding now that most complex challenges cannot be addressed by a single individual or a single approach, but that in fact you usually need an interdisciplinary approach, and mostly you need skills that come from different sectors and different disciplines. So that's the basis of the so-called collective leadership skills. The ASLP fellows work with the Knowledge Innovation is the facilitating team. They come in, they work together, they look at the milestones that they're going to set for their projects, they create their online presence, and then they share all of the opportunities they have. They come back after a year for a 3-day follow-up, and we make sure that that overlaps with the new cohort, so that previous fellows can interact with new fellows. I'll come back to that. And that creates a system of mentorship. So more experienced fellows who've been out and who've been operating their projects come back and serve as mentors for the new fellows. Just to show you a little bit about what's the content of all of that, we do it through offering tools, and not all fellows have to take each of these programs, but they use things like mind maps, diverging and converging approaches, listening. The most popular tool that is, or program is about listening, but also looking at how one clusters. These are all looking at problems and challenges and seeing them as something which can be solved, something that can be addressed. So, as I say, the follow-up workshop is planned so that the previous and new cohorts can interact, and that creates the collaborations, it creates the mentorship program, and at the end of it all, what comes out of it is ways to develop those connections and to keep them going. There is a very intensive and extensive resource page which is used by all the fellows, and there's the website. I'm sure everybody's going to get given these slides, you'll be able to find it. This is just a photograph of the group from 2018 and acknowledgement to all of the sponsors of the program. As you can see, it's a very varied group, and they did come from, I think this time, 18 different countries. I just want to say a little bit about what's going to be the next step, and that is that the ASLP is now going to be hosted by Future Africa, which is our new initiative. This is a drone's photograph of the new campus that we've just built and established, and some of you will be coming to the launch next week on Friday. It is a campus. The buildings you can see in the front there are residences for about 350 people, mostly postdoctoral fellows, PhD students, and a section of it operates as a kind of hotel for visiting scholars. Behind that, as what you can see, I'm not sure if this is going to, no. The circular building is a conference center. There is an extensive open research commons area, and then the hub of it all is in fact a place where people meet and eat, kind of restaurant. So the whole thing is based on our Hillcrest campus, where we have an experimental farm of quite a big area. It's in the heart of Pretoria, of course, and right on the fence of the Innovation Hub and close by the CSIR. So that's our new campus as it is. But what we are doing with it is developing it as a community. We are saying that Future Africa is a Pan-African community. It's a home for scholars. It's a physical place, of course. But the idea of Future Africa is that it will be the base for transdisciplinary research. And we have a number of research programs which we are about to roll out. They will be launched next week. But the whole basis of it is to draw scholars in from across Africa to join us in those research programs, all of which will address the challenges that Africa faces. I'm not going to read you these words either, but this is the basis, the vision of what Future Africa will be. There are a number of other initiatives, though, that I want to just mention, and you will again find them on our website, because they all interact. What happens at Future Africa is a broad set of research programs and a cross-cutting set of community building, research capacity building activities, interdisciplinary and inter-program seminars and so on, right across, featuring from the social sciences to the natural sciences, and linking closely with our other new initiative, which is the Javet Art Center, which is based in the humanities and social sciences. I'd like to just mention the Global Young Academy. This is not ours, of course. The Global Young Academy is an international organization, but we encourage our young researchers to be involved or to participate at least peripherally with the Global Young Academy. It's a voice for young scientists in the world. At the moment, they have 200 members. They are selected young scientists between 30 and 40 at the early ages of their academic careers. And they work together. Again, there are meetings, but also virtual meetings, and they represent a quite strong voice for young views on science and where science should go. They have research themes which we seek to align with. So 3 of them there: science and society, the research environment, and science education and outreach. As you can see, these are not strictly academic disciplinary research focus areas. They are much more about creating an enabling environment for young researchers and leadership for young researchers. They do focus quite strongly on the Sustainable Development Goals, as do we at the University of Pretoria, but they look at it as providing advice to policy as young scientists, and that's why we encourage our young researchers to become involved. Then finally, let me just say a little bit about what we are doing at the university. We have an Early Career Research Leader Fellowship. Now, we've been running an Early Career Research Development Program for 9 years, the 9 years I've been at UP. And that has been growing and expanding. But this is a follow-up to that. And it's really asking the youngsters who are really interested in leadership to become part of this fellowship. It starts, in fact, with looking at proposals at different levels, not necessarily at the beginning of a PhD, in some cases proposals for big research grants. But the fellows who come have an opportunity to present what they are proposing as their current work, to discuss it, and then to discuss how they might take that to external stakeholders. For example, industry, government, and other departments who might want to collaborate with them. It follows on from our Early Career Academics Orientation, which is another program which we run. That's run by our Graduate Support Hub and our Research Office, and it is a fairly intensive orientation of the sort that my 2 colleagues spoke about earlier, in terms of structure and what we provide for our early career academics. But what we add to that in the fellowship program is the opportunity to interact with senior academics who come to share their own academic journeys, and not only to motivate our young researchers, but also to share their experiences. And we find it a very positive and in some cases intuitive process. The senior academics who come often bring a very different view from what you think senior academics are going to bring in terms of the journey that they have traveled and what they advise emerging researchers to take up. This is the initial group, or part of the group, who met this year for that fellowship program, and that's the Future Africa residents in the background. Then we also have the Tuks Young Research Leader Program, which is also aimed to grow our early career academics. It's an ongoing program with leadership, team development, engagement, collaboration, and usually focusing on particular challenges, often around the Sustainable Development Goals. It's intended to form a community. That community now has its home at Future Africa because the interaction spaces there lend themselves to this kind of program, and they meet there regularly. It's a new initiative in terms of having partnerships from other centers in our university. So we have a Center for Responsible Leadership, and they partner with us in running this initiative. Again, we have some funding for that. And that serves for young career researchers to join us in taking their research programs and developing them, interacting with colleagues in other fields. And just a few pictures. The kind of programs that we run always involve very interactive seminars and workshops. This is just showing 1 or 2 of the scenes from that, just to give you an idea of the kind of environment that they have. And that was what I wanted to tell you. Thank you.
Right. So our final speaker for this session is Professor Angina Parekh, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Johannesburg.
Good morning and welcome to the University of Johannesburg. And thanks to ACU and USAF for coordinating and putting together this conference, which we're very pleased to host. I want to just acknowledge 3 people, one of whom has already left the room. But I want to acknowledge Kirthi Menon, who's our Senior Director for Academic Planning, but also Staff Development. Shireen Matara, who's the Senior Director for the University's Postgraduate School. And then a former colleague and a very close friend, Adam Habib, some of which I'm going to be talking about, happened during his time. So if you want to be critical, criticize him as well. But there are two parts to what I want to talk about. I don't have an actual formal presentation. It's going to be more of a conversation. But the first is to showcase what UJ has been doing. And I think that that was part of what my mandate was when I was asked to speak at this symposium. But the second, and what I really would like to spend a bit more time, is to talk about some of the challenges of early career researchers. Because I think that I've heard some of the wisdom being shared earlier on, but I think that we are creating more problems than solutions for ourselves. And I think we really need to think very seriously about our approach to the development of young academics and young researchers. But let me just give you a little bit of a brief historical overview of University of Johannesburg. University of Johannesburg was formed in 2005. It was one of the mergers that took place in South Africa. And at the time of its formation, it was a merger between a historically Technikon, white Technikon, and historical white university, and incorporated two historical distance education campuses of Vista University. So it was quite a medley, in a sense, that came together to create the University of Johannesburg. People thought at the time that this is a university that was never going to work because the institutional cultures were so different. It wasn't just about a Technikon and a university. There was issues about race, there was issues about gender, there was issues about just everything you name was in the smelting pot of the University of Johannesburg. But one of the first things that we had to address amongst the many challenges that we faced as a new institution was that we had to address the issue of diversity. I mean, the university itself was predominantly a white university. So it wasn't just about getting more black researchers into the university, it was about just making sure that we provided access to black academics into the university. The second big challenge that we faced as a university was the qualifications. Because for those of you who remember the former Technikons, there was never, ever an emphasis on the academics there to even have a master's qualification, let alone do research. So in a sense, one half of our university was staff who didn't have a master's qualification and had no idea about what to do or how to go about engaging in research. And then we were also confronted with a small group of very highly talented researchers who were also reaching retirement age, the difficulty or the problem of the aging researcher. So we had a lot of multiple challenges that we needed to deal with. And the first thing we did as a university is that said that we needed to ensure that at least we begin to shift the baseline, and that the majority of our academics need to at least have a master's qualification. That was the minimum. And so we introduced what we call the Staff Qualifications Program, and it was money put into by the university, and a decision taken that all of our academic staff would need to have at least a master's qualification. Now you can imagine that that in itself provoked a lot of negative reaction, because there was arguments from the unions and everything that we're changing the conditions of service, which we were. But we stood our ground, and kicking and screaming, we finally managed to get the program up and running. And over what we thought was going to be a 2-year program, turned out to be about a 4-year program. But in a sense, we had about 160 academics without a master's qualification. And by the end of the 4 years, we had more or less 98% of the academics with a master's qualification. And those that didn't get it in that time, we then performance managed out of the system. So we stood firm on some basic conditions that we needed to implement within the university. The reason I say we needed to stay firm, because often academic growth tends to be seen to be organic. It's left to the individual to decide how he is going to develop. And what we found initially is that as a university, we needed to steer the system in fundamental, strategic, directive ways. Being reasonable, but being firm at the same time. And we began to realize that, the approach that we adopted for the university was, in fact, starting to bear fruit. What we found is that as we began to develop the academics, and once they began to get a sense or get their master's qualification, they themselves began to get a better sense of themselves. It helped with their own self-esteem and a sense of actually wanting to continue and further their studies and carry on with the doctorate. And we introduced what we call the staff qualifications program at the doctoral level, and that in itself was also very, very successful. More recently, in around 2015, we introduced what we call the Accelerated Academic Mentorship Program. And that's got about 200 and currently about 250, 260 academics on the program. The program is organized around 3 levels. The first level is to support those academics who need to get a doctoral qualification. That's level 1. Level 2 are for staff who already do have a doctoral qualification and are needing to be moved towards becoming promoted towards associate professor, and they need to actually get on and be supervised and supported with their research. And the third is those who are already at the associate professor level and need now to step up to the full professor level. And all 3 levels are steered and coordinated by highly talented academics. In fact, from the associate professor to the professor, the coordinator of that is our A-rated philosopher. So it's a very engaged program. We appoint mentors for all of our academics on these programs, and it's turning out to be hugely successful. We already have 88 of our what we call AMP members of staff who have either attained a doctoral qualification or have been promoted to full professor or associate professor. So in some senses, we've got a range of strategies. We've got this program, we've got the NGAP program, we've got what we call the assistant lecturer program, which is for young masters and doctoral students. We offer them a 3-year contract. The assistant lecturer level, they're your entry into the academy. We give them a 3-year appointment, and once they've completed, and if there are posts available, they get migrated into the permanent establishment. And already we have about 30 of our assistant lecturers who've already joined the permanent establishment. So we have a number of strategies in place, a number of multiple strategies addressing a number of different and sometimes related objectives. And, over the years, we found that we have, in fact, begun to change the, we've addressed the racial imbalance, certainly in terms of the academic cohort. We're starting to increase the number of professors in the university. We've also ensuring that as we go along, we're increasing the number of academics with PhDs. And I'm more than happy, and my colleagues here would be more than happy to also talk to you later on if you want to know more details about the various initiatives that we do have in place. I want to shift gear, and I'm sorry I'm rushing a little bit with my input because I have a graduation ceremony that I am as the Chancellor, and I need to officiate. So I do need to move on. I want to come back, I want to talk about some of the challenges that not only the university, but I think the system is confronting in terms of the early career researchers. I've not been here over the past day, and I've been here just for a bit of the session just before our session. But in the little that I've heard, and both in terms of the presenters, but also in terms of the questions that have been raised, talked about early career researchers with an emphasis only on research. No one, not one person, has ever mentioned teaching. And that, for me, is a serious oversight. That we can talk about research without any reference to teaching. That the predominant focus of the development of researchers rests within the research divisions within the university. That there is no connection with the teaching. And so for me, what's missing in the conversation is the teaching-research nexus. How do we make sure that we don't just focus on research without focus on teaching? Nowhere in the discussion, and maybe it was said yesterday, but I certainly haven't come across it, and I don't come across it in the literature either. No one talks here about undergraduate research. No one talks about how do we ensure that our undergraduate curriculum prepares our young students for research. We always talk about research as almost starting when you get to the postgraduate, when you get to your master's, when you get to your doctorate. But research should actually begin from first year. We should be introducing our first-year students to issues of research methodology, to issues of statistics, to how to engage in fundamental basic research. We should be engaging, twinning our young students with our senior researchers and scholars. If you go and if you look at the universities around the world, in some of the top universities at UCLA, wherever, they have a very, very strong and vibrant undergraduate research program. But we don't seem to have that. Or we do, we talk about it, but we actually have not taken it very, very seriously. There is no money from government to support undergraduate research, but a lot of money is going in from government to support senior research development. So I think that if we're talking about how do we develop young researchers, we need to begin to start looking at how we inculcate appreciation of research and a sense of how to go about doing research at the undergraduate level. You start there, not at the postgraduate level. The second challenge that I want to kind of put out there is that I understand and fully support the need for the South African system to develop its research capabilities, absolutely. But I think we are running the risk of doing that by isolating our top scholars from the academy in its broad sense. So a lot of the Saatchi chairs, the requirement is not for them to teach. So a lot of our students will never, ever get exposed to the top academics in the university. And again, is this what we want? Surely, if you're a first-year student, and I always say this to my professors, I said, how many of you would want to have gone through an entire university career, never ever having met your very strong professors? That you were only taught by young academics. So how do we ensure that even our senior scholars are actually feeding into the teaching? How do they share what they're doing in both at undergraduate level and even at honors level? So the model of the Saatchi chair I find problematic. I'm not saying that they must go every year teaching 1 semester, 2 semesters of undergraduate. But I do have a problem where the condition for the appointment to associate chair is you don't have to teach. So that's a second issue. The third issue that I'm finding, and it's, you know, I speak from my frame of UJ, but it could be elsewhere, is that increasingly, because we are placing so much emphasis on research, research is seen to be what everybody aspires to be. They want to be researchers. They want to be professors, not because they want to share and teach. They want to be professors because it means they don't have to teach. Because more and more professors are saying, leave us alone. We can produce 3 outputs, 4 outputs, a book chapter, whatever, as long as we don't teach. Free us of those teaching responsibilities. The burden of teaching then falls to the very same cohort that we're trying to develop. Those young academics that we are wanting to develop as researchers are the ones that are facing the brunt of having to teach, and teach, in many cases, very large classes. How do we expect them to then try and balance their load between teaching and research when a number of our professors are not doing the teaching, but abrogating their responsibility to the junior, to the lecturers, to the senior lecturers? So again, the issue is that when we talk about early career researchers, it's not just about going overseas and presenting at conferences. It's not just about fundraising. It's not just about publishing. It's not about supervising. It's about how do we ensure that the workload distribution within the university is done in such a way that enables and frees our young academics to be able to actually become researchers. And I don't think that we've given that much thought. We've recently had a whole university-wide discussion on the academic workload. And trust me, the most difficult people to sell a workload model was the professors. They did not want it. They were the ones that argued. And they were the ones who often would say, but why do you think that a professor can teach? I said, that's a very good question. But then, by the same token, why do you think that a lecturer can teach? Because nobody, not a single professor, will ever raise concerns about why a young lecturer is teaching. So I think the issue about how do we ensure equitable or reasonable workload distribution across the institution that will enable young academics to be able to focus on their own research development. So my point, ladies and gentlemen, is that we can't be talking about the development of research without taking on the debate about teaching. Because otherwise, we're setting up young academics for failure and for a huge amount of resentment. We've had young academics saying to us that they feel overwhelmed. And increasingly, their desire to get a PhD and to do research is not because they want to be good academics, but they want to be freed of teaching. And finally, my point is, how do we, as a university, ensure that we move towards a model of research-led teaching? How do we take the research that we are producing and feed that back into the curriculum? Because there's no conversation about the connection between teaching and research. So I think that, I think what we're trying to do is important, but I think that if we are going to be successful at our range of initiatives, both at national and institutional level, we can't just be focusing on one end of the spectrum. We have to see the development of research in a more holistic way. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Parekh. So we're gonna open it up for questions. I just wanted to tell you what the rest of the plans are going to be. We after the question time, we're gonna go directly into the next session. We're not going to have a break. That next session will take us up to 1 o'clock, which I presume is the lunch break. So it will be a shortened session. But I will give a little bit more background when we get to that session. So let me just hear whether there are any particular questions. Show of hands. Adam, we've got one. Any others? Siswe? Okay, right. We got those two. Adam?
So I was intrigued by Angina's last set of statements and identifying what I think are real problems. The only thing I would say, Angina, is that when you ask people as representatives of either DVCs of research or the research officers to speak, it's inevitably that they're going to kind of lean towards the research component. But I think you raise important questions. And I want to bring back two parts to this. Yesterday, we had a conversation on differentiation. And everybody starts off believing in differentiation and then they promptly forget the word. And it seems to me that this entire thing has to kind of say, what do we mean about the teaching? I think you're right, research nexus, and how does it play out in different institutions, depending on your respective mandates? I think if we don't do that, we're going to get into all kinds of things. If we treat everyone as our institutions as having the same mandate, then the teaching research nexus is not going to work. But if you start saying, what is the teaching research nexus at UFS compared to UJ, compared to Stellenbosch, you'll have a very different evolution. And I think that that's part of the problem. We need a systemic conversation around that. And the second is I wanted to ask a question, is whether there's some merit in bringing down, going back to a traditional model of the institution. Because my fear is, yes, teaching and research need to be linked, but they're not the same thing. And there are some people with the skill sets that are going to lend themselves to research and others that are going to have a skill set that are going to lend themselves to teaching. And how do we recognize both within the university? And how do we enable that to happen? Now, as I recall, in the late 80s, while I was still a student, in the early 1990s, there were two pathways within the universities. One was the collective academic model, and then there was what they used to call the reader or the associate professor at some point was that category. And I'm asking the question, should we rethink not two separate models, but two evolutionary paths for the academic within the university?
Right. Thank you. Adam, can you just give it to Siswe? I could just before Siswe answer, I remember you weren't here yesterday, but I think some of that questions was caught up in a question that Rob asked about, when we're talking about developing the researcher, we must rather talk about developing the academic, and which in itself, although he didn't explicitly state that, which in itself reflect that there are other parts of being academic other than just being a researcher. Siswe?
Before I make my comment, I just want to respond to what Adam is saying. I don't think we need to create an unnecessary binary between teaching and learning, teaching and research. You can be a practitioner of teaching and still engage in the scholarship of teaching, because that teaching practice has to be informed by research. So I don't think there is any tension in the two. You can actually creatively engage both. Stephanie, this is just a comment. You made a long list of the kinds of things that we expect of academics. It was quite long, but you did not finish that. I assume that you meant that we were being unreal unless we did something to facilitate the development of that academic. Given the 10, 20 things that we expect of a young academic, without any proper intervention, we are setting them up for failure, which I think is absolutely right.
Right. I think, I don't know whether, Angina, you want to comment on the model. I think just maybe one last comment before I'm going to ask you to respond, and then to Stephanie to maybe also respond, is that you typically will find institutions when you're looking at appointments and promotion and the performance management of academic staff, that you got the classical model, as you've indicated, which take to balance the 4 categories that normally you would expect from any academic to do, which also include the teaching and learning, but also engage scholarship and then probably leadership and administration as well. But you can skew that depending on your differentiated approach, where you can say that there are certain categories that are probably more research orientated, then you weight it differently. Or you can also have the other one, where people probably just say, well, I want to focus more on teaching, but as we say, the scholarship of teaching. You're never gonna reduce it purely just from an educational perspective, only to teach. The scholarship of training. So you get one model that take into account both deviations. But I think some institutions across the world is doing that. Again?
Thank you. I want to address both the points raised by Adam. Adam, I think just simply talking about a differentiated system and going back, and I'm not sure that necessarily that's what you were suggesting, but going back to this kind of assumption that there would be some universities that would be more teaching-focused universities and some more research-focused universities. And that in itself, we need to understand the teaching research nexus in the context of a differentiated higher education system is problematic. Because even research-focused universities have to teach. And my point is not about the differentiation. I'm more worried about the binary differentiation, regardless of which university you're at, whether you're a more research-intensive university or whether you're a teaching institution. Because even within a teaching institution, there's going to be elements of research or pockets of research that's been done. My concern is that because the country, within the science councils, within the department, that we tend to prioritize research over teaching, that the academy, the academics, are not seeing teaching as part and parcel of what it means to be an academic, but that teaching is an irritation that one just needs to bear with. And that's a danger. It's a serious, serious danger for higher education, because even at the top universities in the world, you have very good teachers, and they also do good research. So how do we ensure that we don't prioritize one to the extent that it starts to undermine the importance of teaching? So I'm not sure that the differentiated approach is necessarily the answer. The issue about creating pathways. Now, again, if you go to National University of Singapore, and even a number of other good universities globally, they do have different pathways, what they call the teaching track pathway and then the research pathway. But the problem is that our academic pool is not big enough as a sector. We don't have, I think maybe as the system matures and as we develop more and more academics entering the higher education space, we can begin to start developing those kind of pathways. But you do need, in order for you to develop a teaching pathway, you do need a critical mass of academics as well. So that's the one issue. The second is, at the University of Johannesburg, we have introduced, in fact, we introduced it a while back. The problem we did, and we're now having to reflect again, because I think that, it was a very silly approach that we adopted. So we said, one is that you can have a teaching track, but the highest you can go up to is an associate professor. So if you want to be a full professor, you still have to meet the requirements the research requirements of a full professor. Now, which academic wants to go all the way up to being an associate professor and not become a full professor? And then you say, well, if you want, then they say, well, if that's the requirement, then I might as well pursue the full research track from word go. So in some senses, we've now had to rethink what we mean and the criteria for the two-track pathway. The second is that we've also said that for the teaching track, you don't have to do the kind of traditional research, but you do research in the scholarship of teaching. That is still research, because they still have to publish. They might publish a chapter in a book, they're going to publish in a journal. You still require the publication. You still require the research. The only difference is it's in the scholarship of teaching, as opposed to, say, being in physics. So the person who's following the teaching track is saying, what is the difference? So I like the idea of the two-track. I think, we need a lot more thought to how we construct it. And it can work, but we need to be serious about it. Because if we still continue to see teaching track as inferior to the research track, we're going to have a very small appetite for the one track.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be quick. Let me start by saying, I think the comment that Adam made, that if you ask a DVC for research to speak about it, they'll speak about research and research capacity development, which is in fact what we were asked to do. But in fact, different institutions are very different in their approaches, and I think we have to acknowledge that. My own institution does not have separate research and teaching and learning plans and strategies. We have an academic program, and it involves all of those, and it is written jointly by the two DVCs for research and academic. And we take it as one which includes all of our undergraduates. They are all invited to be participants in the research. So I think you should not make assumptions about what different universities do. I also wanted to say, the debate about whether professors want to do research or want to be teachers is not, again, one that you should make assumptions about, because I come from an institution which has moved itself. I work at an institution which has moved itself into a research-intensive position over a relatively short period of time, and there are people who have been in that university for a long time who actually don't want to be researchers, even though they've been there a long time, and they are professors because of the history. So again, one should not make assumptions about those things. Then I just also wanted to say, with respect to the continuity or the continuum between research and teaching, it's not difficult to make a performance model or promotion criteria which can be weighted, where you can have a continuum. But I think what is really important about that is to understand, to make sure that academics, especially the emerging researchers, understand that, so that they don't put an unrealistic emphasis on one or the other, but they understand where their weighting is going to be. And then, Sizwe, I really agree with you, with what you said, and thank you for interpreting it like that. I do think that if we don't provide our emerging researchers with the kind of support systems that they need, we will set them up for failure. But my view is that the answer to that, or part of the answer to that, is making sure that you have a really robust mentorship system, which allows them access to experienced professors, experienced researchers, academics who can advise. They don't need to be even in the same faculty, but that we find is working well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Can we give our presenters a hand warm of applause? Thank you.